The air inside the large gymnasium felt heavy and thick, like trying to breathe through a warm, wet blanket. High above, the long rows of fluorescent lights buzzed with a constant, humming sound that seemed to drill right into a person's skull. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the worst day of the week for everyone because the weekend felt so far away and the tiredness from the previous days had already settled deep into their bones. In the far corner of the gym, sitting on the bottom row of the cold metal bleachers, was a girl named Chloe. She was small, much smaller than the other students in her class, and she looked as if she might disappear if she turned sideways. Her face was pale, making the dark circles under her eyes stand out like smudges of dirt. She wasn't just tired from a bad night of sleep. She was exhausted in a way that went down to her marrow. It was a deep, aching tiredness that made her eyelids feel like they had weights attached to them. Chloe kept her head down, staring intently at the scuff marks on the rubber floor near her feet. She wore a faded, gray t-shirt that was at least 3 sizes too big for her. The hem hung down almost to her knees, and the sleeve slipped past her hands, hiding her fingers. It was her shield. She pulled her knees up to her chest, trying to make herself as small as possible, hoping that if she stayed quiet and still, the world would just pass her by. The room smelled strongly of old rubber, floor wax, and the faint sour scent of sweaty teenagers. It was a smell that usually made people want to run outside and get fresh air, but Chloe didn't have energy to run anywhere. Her stomach gave a small, painful rumble, but she ignored it. She had gotten used to the feeling of hunger over the last few months. It was just another background noise, like the buzzing lights or the shouting voices bouncing off the gym walls. The rest of the class was spread out across the basketball court. They were loud, full of energy, moving in chaotic groups. Some were dribbling basketballs, the thump-thump-thump echoing rhythmically. Others were chatting and laughing, their voices high and carefree. To Chloe, they looked like they were moving in fast forward while she was stuck on pause. They had problems, sure, but they were normal problems. Homework crushes, broken phones. Chloe's problems were much heavier. They were the kind that kept a person awake until 3 o'clock in the morning, staring at the ceiling, wondering how they were going to fix everything that was falling apart. Just a few hours ago, before the school bus picked her up, Chloe had been at the hospital. She hadn't been visiting. She had been working things out. Her mother had been there for 3 days now, and the bills were piling up higher than the stacks of laundry at home. Chloe had spent the early morning trying to navigate the confusing world of insurance papers and payment plans on a cracked phone screen. The stress of it was making her hair feel like it was pulling at her scalp. She felt dizzy, a constant swimming sensation in her head that made the bright lights of the gym blur together whenever she looked up too fast. Across the room, the double metal doors swung open with a loud bang. The gym teacher, Mr. Vance, walked in. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and a voice that carried across the entire space without him needing to shout. He wore a blue whistle around his neck and held a clipboard in his hand, like it was a weapon. He looked energized, his face flushed from the heat, ready to push the students to their limits. "All right, listen up," Mr. Vance called out, clapping his hands together once. The sharp sound cut through the noise, and the students began to gather around him, forming a loose semicircle. Everyone moved except Chloe. She stayed glued to her spot on the bleachers, pulling her oversized shirt tighter around herself. Mr. Vance scanned the group, his eyes moving quickly from face to face. He was the kind of teacher who believed that sweat built character. He didn't have much patience for students who he thought were lazy or faking it. To him, physical education class was simple. You moved, you tried hard, and you got better. He didn't see the invisible burden students carried. He only saw whether they could run a mile in under 10 minutes. "Today is the day," Mr. Vance announced, a grin spreading across his face. "Kickball tournament. We're going to divide you into 2 teams, red versus blue. And let me make this interesting. The winning team gets a pass on the final written exam. No test, just an automatic A." A cheer erupted from the group. High fives were exchanged, and the energy in the room spiked instantly. For most of them, this was the best news they had heard all week. They began immediately arguing about who would be on which team, shouting out names and jostling for position. Chloe felt her heart sink. A game, running, kicking. It felt impossible. She looked down at her sneakers. They were old, The white rubber turned yellow, and the soles were worn smooth on the inside. She tried to wiggle her toes, but they felt numb. Her legs felt like they were made of lead pipes. She knew if she stood up right now, she might just fall right back down. The dizziness washed over her again, stronger this time, and she gripped the edge of the metal bench beneath her to steady herself. She wasn't trying to be difficult. She wasn't trying to be lazy. She just physically could not do it. She needed a break. She needed 5 minutes of silence in a cool, dark room, but she was stuck here in the noise and the heat. "All right, pick your captains." Mr. Vance yelled, blowing his whistle. The shriek made Chloe flinch, the sound piercing her sensitive ears like a needle. 2 boys stepped forward, popular and athletic, and began picking their teams. One by one, names were called. Jason, Samantha, Tyrell, Jessica. Each time a name was called, a student would run over to their assigned side, laughing and ready to play. The pool of sitting students got smaller and smaller. Chloe watched them go. She stayed perfectly still, breathing slowly through her nose, trying to keep her breakfast down, which consisted of a small piece of toast she had managed to grab before rushing out the door. She hoped that maybe, just maybe, with an odd number of students, she would be the one left out. Maybe she could be the scorekeeper. Maybe she could just sit on the bench and watch until the bell rang. But then the picking stopped. There was 1 spot left on the red team and 1 spot left on the blue team. The room went quiet for a moment. The captains looked around, confused. Then someone pointed toward the bleachers. Mr. Vance turned his head. His eyes locked onto the corner where Chloe was sitting. The friendly look on his face vanished, replaced by a look of annoyance. He didn't see the sick girl. He saw a student breaking the rule of participation. He strutted across the gym floor, his footsteps squeaking loudly against the polished wood. The students parted to let him through, and the silence spread. Chloe watched him coming, her heart pounding against her ribs, so hard it hurt. She wanted to sink through the floor, to become part of the metal bench, but she couldn't move. She was trapped. Mr. Vance stopped at the bottom of the bleachers, looking up at her. He blocked out the light, casting a shadow over her. "Chloe," he said, his voice hard, "are you planning on joining the human race today? Or are you just going to sit there and pout?" The other students snickered nervously. Chloe felt her face burn with shame. She wrapped her arms around her stomach, trying to hold herself together. She looked up at him, her vision swimming slightly, and whispered, I don't feel good, Mr. Vance." The teacher shook his head, crossing his arms over his chest. He had heard it 1,000 times before. Stomach aches, headaches, tiredness. To him, they were just excuses to avoid work. He didn't notice a tremor in her hands or the gray tint to her skin. He only saw a student he thought was trying to get out of gym class. "Everyone else is playing," Mr. Vance said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "You don't get a free pass just because you don't feel like it. This is about teamwork, Chloe. You're letting your team down before the game even starts." Chloe bit her lip, fighting back tears of frustration and physical pain. She knew that if she tried to explain about her mom, about the hospital, about the bills, he wouldn't understand. Or worse, he would think she was lying. She just wanted to go home, but she couldn't. She was stuck. "Please," she squeaked, her voice barely audible over the buzzing lights. "Can I just sit out for today? Just today?" Mr. Vance stared at her for a long moment. The air between them was tense. The other students were watching, waiting to see what would happen. The teacher let out a heavy sigh, turning his disappointment into a weapon. "Get off the bench, Chloe," he commanded, pointing a finger at the red line of the court. "Get down here and pick a team. If you don't get up in the next 5 seconds, you're going to be running laps for the rest of the period instead of playing." Chloe looked at the red line on the floor. It looked miles away. She looked at the teacher's angry face, and then at the crowd of her peers. She realized then that there was no way out. No one was going to save her. Her body screamed at her to stay still, but the threat of running laps, something that would surely make her pass out, forced her hand. She had to try. She had to play. With a heavy heart and legs that felt like jelly, Chloe began to unfold herself from the metal bench. Every muscle in her body protested, aching with a deep, cold fatigue. She took a deep breath of the stale, hot air, trying to find the strength to stand. She didn't know it yet, But standing up was the biggest mistake she could have made. The clock on the wall kept ticking, counting down the seconds to a moment that would change everything. Chloe finally got her feet under her, but it felt like standing on a boat in the middle of a stormy ocean. Her knees wobbled violently, and she had to grab the metal railing of the bleachers to keep from crumbling back down. The room spun in a slow, lazy circle, and she had to squeeze her eyes shut for a second to make the dizziness stop. When she opened them again, Mr. Vance was still standing there, tapping his foot impatiently on the polished floor. "It takes you 5 minutes to stand up?" Mr. Vance asked, shaking his head in disbelief. "We don't have all day, Chloe. Get down here." Chloe took a shaky step forward. Her legs felt heavy, like they were filled with sand instead of bone and muscle. Each step was a battle. She slowly made her way down the short flight of bleacher stairs, holding onto the rail so tight her knuckles turned white. When she finally stepped onto the gym floor, the hard surface seemed to vibrate up through her sneakers, adding to the nausea rolling in her stomach. She stood there, swaying slightly, waiting for him to tell her where to go. But Mr. Vance didn't move. He was looking over her shoulder. Chloe turned her head slowly and saw Ms. Gable walking toward them. Ms. Gable was the other gym teacher, usually found in the equipment office, but today she was on the floor. She had a clipboard in her hand and a stern look on her face. She was younger than Mr. Vance, but she tried even harder to be tough. She always seemed to be looking for a reason to prove she was in charge. "Is there a problem here?" Ms. Gable asked as she walked up. She didn't look at Chloe with concern. She looked at her like she was a puzzle piece that didn't fit. "No problem," Mr. Vance said, crossing his arms over his chest. Chloe just decided she didn't want to participate today. She thought she could sit on the bench and take a nap while everyone else worked. Ms. Gable let out a sharp, dismissive laugh. "Oh, really? Is that what we're doing today? We're picking and choosing when we want to follow the rules." The other students had stopped their warm-up stretches to watch. It was quiet, except for the hum of the lights and the sound of a basketball bouncing in the distance. Chloe felt 30 pairs of eyes on her. Her face burned with a hot, prickly shame. She hated being the center of attention. She hated being in trouble. "It's not like that," Chloe whispered. Her voice was weak, cracking in the middle of the sentence. I don't feel good." Ms. Gable stepped closer, invading Chloe's personal space. She looked the girl up and down, scanning her like a security guard looking for a hidden weapon. She stared at Chloe's oversized gray shirt and her messy hair. She saw the dark circles under her eyes, but she didn't see sickness. She saw a teenager who didn't care about hygiene. She saw an attitude problem. "You look fine to me," Ms. Gable said, her voice cold. "In fact, you look like you've had plenty of rest. Playing the victim doesn't work in this class. Chloe, you either play or you fail." The word fail hit Chloe like a punch in the chest. She couldn't fail. Her mother was always asking about her grades. Even from the hospital bed, her mom would text her. "Asterisk, did you go to school? Are you passing?" Asterisk, her grades were the only thing her mom could hold on to while she was sick. If Chloe failed gym, it would just be one more thing to worry about. One more disappointment. "Please." Chloe tried again, tears welling up in her eyes. "I haven't slept in I don't know how long. I'm going to fall down if I run." Mr. Vance rolled his eyes, so hard it looked like it hurt. "Stop with the dramatics," he snapped. "You kids stay up all night playing on your phones, and then wonder why you're tired. You need to learn discipline. Life doesn't stop because you're tired. If you want to get anywhere in this world, you have to push through." He turned and walked over to the equipment bin. He rummaged through the balls and cones for a second, then pulled out a large, red rubber kickball. It was a kind of ball that stung when it hit you, heavy and dense. He marched back to Chloe and shoved the ball into her chest. It was such a sudden, harsh motion that Chloe stumbled back a step. She caught the ball against her chest, hugging it tight. The rubber smelled dusty and old. "You're on the red team," Mr. Vance commanded. "Get out to right field, and if I see you dogging it out there, if I see you walking instead of running, you're going to be doing laps until the bell rings. Do you understand me?" Chloe looked at the ball, then at the teacher, then at Ms. Gable, who was nodding in agreement. There was no compassion in their faces. There was only annoyance and a desire to assert control. They didn't know about the stack of medical bills at home. They didn't know that Chloe had eaten nothing but a slice of bread in the last 24 hours. They just saw a body that wasn't moving fast enough. "Yes," Chloe whispered, defeated. "Yes, what?" Ms. Gable snapped. "Yes, sir," Chloe said, louder this time, though her voice trembled. "Good," Mr. Vance said. He turned his back on her and clapped his hands loudly. "All right, red team, take the field. Blue team, grab your bats." The spell was broken. The students rushed back into motion, the noise level in the gym rising again. Chloe stood alone for a moment, clutching the red ball. She felt a wave of lightheadedness wash over her, so strong that the edges of her vision turned black for a few seconds. She swayed, fighting to stay upright. She took a deep breath, the air tasting like rubber and sweat, and forced herself to move. She began the long walk across the gym to the other side. The floor seemed to stretch out endlessly. Every step was an effort of will. Her heart was beating so fast it felt like a trapped bird trying to escape her ribs. Thump, thump, thump. As she walked, she passed by the other students. Some of them looked at her with pity, but most just looked away, relieved it wasn't them being yelled at. One boy, a tall kid named Josh who was on the varsity baseball team, looked at her and frowned. He noticed how pale she was, how she was practically dragging her feet. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, maybe to ask if she was okay, but then he looked at Mr. Vance. He saw the angry look on the teacher's face and closed his mouth. He turned back to his teammates, not wanting to get in trouble either. Chloe reached the outfield. The bright red line painted on the floor marked the boundary. She stepped over it, walking all the way to the far wall, putting as much distance between herself and the action as possible. The floor out here was dusty. She could see her own footprints in a fine layer of gray powder. She stood there, alone in the corner of the massive gym. The wall behind her was cool concrete, and she leaned back against it for just a second, letting the coldness seep through her shirt. It helped cool the burning heat on her skin. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, wishing she could just melt into the wall and disappear. "Play ball," someone shouted. The game began. Chloe could hear the sound of the bat hitting the ball, asterisk thwack asterisk, and then the shouting as players ran. She tried to focus, tried to keep her eyes open, but it was so hard. The heat was suffocating. It felt like the oxygen was being sucked out of the room. She looked down at the red ball in her hands. She was supposed to throw it in if it came to her, but her arms felt so weak. She didn't even know if she could lift it up to throw. She felt trapped in a nightmare where everyone was watching, expecting her to perform, but she had forgotten how to move her body. Mr. Vance was standing near home plate, his voice booming across the gym as he umpired the game. "Strike one," he yelled. "Come on, keep your eye on the ball." He didn't even look out toward right field. He had already moved on, satisfied that he had won the battle of wills. He had forced the girl to play. To him, the problem was solved. But for Chloe, the problem was just getting started. She pressed her back harder against the wall, praying silently that the ball wouldn't come to her. She wasn't sure she had the strength to even catch it, let alone throw it back. She just had to survive. She just had to stand there until the bell rang. But as the game went on, the noise got louder, the movement faster, and her vision started to blur at the edges, signaling that her body was reaching its absolute limit. The game was moving faster than Chloe's mind could handle. It felt like everyone was running at double speed while she was stuck in slow motion, trapped in a body that refused to cooperate. From her spot in the deep corner of the gym, the other players looked like colorful blurs darting back and forth. The sound of sneakers squeaking against the floor was sharp and piercing, making her wince every time someone stopped suddenly. She tried to focus on the game. Really, she did. She knew the rules. She knew she was supposed to watch the batter, track the ball, and be ready to run. But her brain felt like it was wrapped in thick cotton. Every thought took too long to form. She would blink, and seconds would seem to disappear. The bright lights overhead were leaving streaks in her vision whenever she moved her eyes. Chloe shifted her weight from one foot to the other. Her legs were trembling, not from the cold, but from pure exhaustion. It felt like the floor was tilting slightly to the left. She leaned back against the hard concrete wall to steady herself. The coolness of the wall was the only thing keeping her grounded. If she didn't have that solid surface behind her, she was sure she would tip over. She watched as a boy on the blue team kicked the ball. It went high, soaring toward the ceiling. The red team players shouted, running to get under it. Chloe stood still, her heart rate picking up slightly just from the anxiety of watching. The ball bounced on the floor. Then a girl on her team grabbed it and threw it to the pitcher. Out! Mr. Vance yelled. Chloe let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She was safe for another second. The ball hadn't come to her. Mr. Vance and Ms. Gable were standing near the pitcher's mound, their eyes constantly scanning the field. Chloe saw Ms. Gable look in her direction. Ms. Gable leaned over and whispered something to Mr. Vance, pointing a finger toward the corner. Mr. Vance didn't look happy. He shook his head and frowned. They couldn't hear the conversation, but Chloe could feel their judgment from across the gym. They thought she was being lazy. They thought she was just leaning against the wall because she didn't want to play. It made her angry, deep down in her stomach, but she was too tired to show it. They didn't know that she was using every ounce of her strength just to remain vertical. They didn't know that leaning against the wall wasn't a choice. It was the only thing keeping her from passing out right there on the dusty floor. The game continued. The score was tied, and the tension in the gym was rising. The students were getting competitive, shouting louder, running harder. The air seemed to get thicker and hotter with every minute that passed. Chloe's mouth felt dry, like it was full of sawdust. She swallowed hard, trying to get some moisture, but her throat was parched. Suddenly, a ball came rolling her way. It was a slow grounder, bouncing lazily along the baseline. It wasn't moving fast, but to Chloe, it looked like a boulder rolling down a hill. A boy on the other team was running toward first base. Her teammates were screaming at her. Chloe, get the ball. Throw it. Throw it. She pushed herself off the wall. Her legs felt unsteady, like they were made of jelly. She took 2 steps toward the ball. The distance seemed so far. She reached down, her fingers clumsy and stiff. She wrapped her hands around the rubber ball. It felt heavy, like a bowling ball. She picked it up. She looked for a target. Everyone was yelling different things. First base. Second base. Home. The noise was a chaotic swirl in her ears. She couldn't pick out individual voices. Panic started to rise in her chest, choking her. She pulled her arm back to throw, but there was no power in her muscles. The ball left her hand and traveled a pathetic 5 feet before dropping to the floor with a soft thud. The runner rounded the base and kept going. The other team scored. "Oh my God, Chloe!" one of her classmates yelled, throwing his hands up in frustration. "Are you kidding me?" The disappointment was worse than the anger. Chloe felt her face burn with shame. She wanted to apologize, to say she was sorry, that she was trying her best, but no words came out. She just stood there, staring at the ball on the floor. Mr. Vance blew his whistle. The sound was like a knife in her ear. "Time out," he yelled. He didn't even look at the runner who scored. He marched straight toward Chloe, his face red with irritation. "What was that?" he demanded, stopping a few feet away from her. "That was pathetic. My grandmother throws harder than that." Chloe looked at the floor. She couldn't look him in the eye. I tried," she mumbled. "Trying isn't good enough." Mr. Vance shouted. A few students stopped talking to watch. "You are barely moving out here. You are leaning against the wall. You are throwing the ball like a baby. If you don't want to be here, fine. But you are going to give me effort. Do you hear me?" "I'm sorry," Chloe whispered. Tears were stinging the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Miss Gable walked over, standing next to Mr. Vance with her arms crossed. She looked at Chloe with a sneer. "Maybe if you spent less time feeling sorry for yourself and more time paying attention, you wouldn't be embarrassing yourself like this," she said coldly. The words hit Chloe hard. Embarrassing. That's exactly how she felt. She felt small and weak and stupid. But she wasn't feeling sorry for herself. She was surviving. She was holding on by a thread, and these adults, who were supposed to take care of her, were just cutting that thread. "Get your head in the game," Mr. Vance snapped. He pointed a finger in her face. "The next ball that comes to you, you better catch it. And you better throw it with everything you have. If you dog it again, you're off the team and you fail the class. Do I make myself clear?" Chloe nodded. She couldn't speak. She was afraid that if she opened her mouth, a sob would escape. "Yes." Mr. Vance yelled when she didn't speak out loud. "Say yes." "Yes," Chloe choked out. "Good. Now get back in position." They walked away, shaking their heads. Chloe watched them go. She felt a wave of hopelessness wash over her. She wanted to run. She wanted to sprint out the metal doors of the gym and keep running until she couldn't breathe anymore. She wanted to go home to her mom, even if the house was empty and quiet. At least there, people didn't scream at her for being sick. But she couldn't run. She didn't have the energy. She was trapped. The game resumed. The blue team was up to kick again. This time it was Josh. He was a varsity baseball player, the strongest athlete in class. He walked up to the home plate area, swinging his legs loosely. He looked confident. He looked powerful. Chloe stayed in her spot in right field. She was trembling. She felt like she was going to throw up. The dizziness was getting worse. The edges of her vision were turning dark, like a camera lens closing in. She tried to take a deep breath to calm herself, but the air just tasted like rubber and sweat. Mr. Vance pitched the ball. He threw it hard. Josh wound up his leg and kicked. The connection was solid. It sounded like a cannon going off in the small gym. The ball launched off his foot with incredible speed. It wasn't a line drive along the ground. It went high into the air, flying straight up toward the ceiling. And then gravity caught it, and it began to descend. Chloe tracked it with her eyes. It was a red dot against the harsh white lights. It was coming right for her. For a second, time seemed to stop completely. The shouting in the gym faded away. The only thing Chloe could hear was the rushing sound of blood in her ears. She saw the ball spinning, getting bigger and bigger as it fell through the air. She knew she had to catch it. She knew she had to move. Mr. Vance's words echoed in her mind. "You better catch it." Her brain sent a signal to her legs. Asterisk jump. Reach up. Catch the ball. Asterisk. But her legs didn't get the message. They were dead weights, anchored to the floor. Her arms felt like lead pipes hanging at her sides. She tried to lift them, tried to step forward, but her body had reached its limit. It was shutting down. The lack of sleep, the lack of food, the stress, the sickness. It all crashed down on her at once. She watched the ball coming, helpless to do anything about it. It was a nightmare where you scream but no sound comes out, where you run but you don't move. She felt a strange sense of calm wash over her, mixed with a blinding terror. She couldn't get out of the way. She couldn't catch it. She could only stand there and wait. The ball dropped out of the lights. A red missile aimed directly at her face. It spun violently, the seams blurring together. Chloe looked right at it, her eyes wide and unfocused. She was frozen, a statue in a gym full of motion, seconds away from a collision that would change everything. The red rubber ball seemed to hang in the air for a tiny eternity, spinning against the bright white lights. For Chloe, the world narrowed down to that single red sphere. She tried to lift her arms. Her brain screamed at her muscles to move, to protect herself, to catch the thing, but the connection was broken. She was a statue made of glass, waiting to shatter. The exhaustion had pulled a heavy curtain over her reflexes, leaving her completely exposed. Then gravity won. The ball dropped from the lights, a heavy, fast projectile aimed right at her. There was a sickening thud, a dull and heavy sound that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. It wasn't the sharp crack of a baseball hitting a bat. It was a terrifying sound of solid rubber hitting a human skull with full force. Chloe didn't even flinch. The impact snapped her head back with violent speed. Her eyes rolled back, and then her legs simply gave up. She didn't try to catch herself. There was no instinct left to put her hands out. She collapsed like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Her body crumpled straight down, hitting the hard, polished floor with a frightening finality. Her head bounced off the wood, a sound that made everyone in the gym flinch, and then she lay still. The red ball rolled away slowly, coming to a rest near the baseline, innocent and silent. For the first 3 seconds, nobody moved. The gymnasium, which had been a chaotic pit of noise just moments before, fell into a dead, suffocating silence. It was a kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air had been sucked out of the room. The students stood frozen, their mouths slightly open, their eyes wide with shock. The boy who had kicked the ball, Josh, took a step forward, his hand halfway at his mouth, his face draining of all color. He looked from the girl on the floor to the teachers, panic rising in his eyes. Mr. Vance was the first to break the spell. The annoyance on his face vanished instantly, replaced by a look of pure, unfiltered horror. He realized what he had done. He had forced a girl who could barely stand to face a line drive. The reality of the situation crashed down on him harder than the ball had hit Chloe. "Chloe!" he shouted, his voice cracking. He didn't wait for an answer. He sprinted across the gym, his sneakers squeaking frantically against the floor. Miss Gable was right behind him, her clipboard forgotten on the floor, her face pale as a sheet. They reached her at the same time. Chloe was lying on her side, her limbs tangled awkwardly. She looked smaller now, almost like a little child, lying there in her oversized gray t-shirt. Her eyes were closed. Her skin was so white it looked translucent. Mr. Vance dropped to his knees beside her. He reached out a hand to shake her shoulder, but he stopped inches from touching her. His hand was trembling. He had never seen a student look like this. She wasn't moving. Not a twitch. Not a breath that he could see. "Chloe, can you hear me?" Mr. Vance's voice was loud, too loud for quiet room, but there was desperation in it now. He gently grabbed her shoulder and gave her a small shake. Her head lolled to the side, loose and heavy. "Is she breathing?" Miss Gable asked, her voice high and shaky. She dropped to her knees on the other side of the girl. She leaned in close, hovering her hand over Chloe's nose and mouth. For 2 seconds, she didn't feel anything. The panic in the room spiked. The students began to murmur, a low hum of fear rippling through the crowd. "Move back!" Ms. Gable suddenly screamed at the students who had started to edge closer. "Give her space. Everyone get back." She turned her attention back to the girl. Finally, she saw it, a tiny, shallow rise of Chloe's chest. It was so faint you had to stare to see it. "She's breathing," Miss Gable whispered, more to herself than to Mr. Vance. "But it's too slow." Mr. Vance was fumbling for his phone in his pocket. His hands were sweating so much, he almost dropped it. "I'm calling 911, he said, his voice sounding strangled. "I'm calling them right now." He pressed the buttons, his fingers clumsy. He put the phone to his ear, but he couldn't take his eyes off Chloe. She looked so fragile. He looked at her face, peaceful in a way that terrified him. He remembered the note, the way she had begged him to sit out. He remembered mocking her for being tired. The guilt hit him in the stomach, like a physical punch. He felt sick. "This is Mr. Vance at the high school gym," he said into the phone, his voice urgent. "We have a student down. Unconscious. Possible head injury. She's not waking up. Send an ambulance now. Hurry." While he was on the phone, Miss Gable was trying to check for other injuries. She carefully touched Chloe's arms and legs. "Nothing feels broken," she muttered, but she hit the floor hard. She reached out and gently brushed a stray lock of hair away from Chloe's forehead. The skin was clammy and cold to the touch, a stark contrast to the hot, sweaty gym. "She's burning up," Miss Gable said, looking at Mr. Vance with wide eyes. "She's sweating, but her skin is ice cold." Mr. Vance ended the call and shoved the phone into his pocket. "They're on the way. 3 minutes, he said. He looked up at the circle of students staring at them. Their faces were masks of fear and confusion. Some of the girls were crying silently. Josh was standing with his hands on his head, looking like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him. "Nobody move," Mr. Vance commanded, though his voice lacked its usual authority. "Just stay back." He looked back down at Chloe. He gently patted her cheek, a little harder this time. "Chloe? Sweetie, come on. Open your eyes for me." There was no response. She was lost in a deep, dark void. The noise of the gym, the shouting, the panic, it was all gone for her. There was only the quiet blackness. The silence of the gym stretched out, agonizing and heavy. The only sounds were the hum of the lights and Mr. Vance's ragged breathing. He looked at Ms. Gable. She looked like she was going to be sick. This wasn't a scraped knee or a twisted ankle. This was serious. This was life and death. The red ball sat just a few feet away, staring at them like a guilty witness. It had been a game 5 minutes ago. Just a game. And now, a girl was fighting for her life on the floor because they forced her to play. Mr. Vance reached out and took Chloe's hand. It was limp in his grip. He squeezed it gently, praying for a squeeze back, for a flutter of an eyelid, for any sign that she was still in there. But there was nothing. The wait for the ambulance felt like a lifetime. The teacher sat on the hard floor, helpless, watching the shallow rise and fall of the girl's chest. The reality of their mistake hung in the air, heavier than the heat, thicker than the silence. They had seen a slacker, a problem student, a girl who didn't care. They hadn't seen a human being who was breaking. Finally, in the distance, sirens began to wail. The sound grew louder, cutting through the afternoon air, piercing the walls of the school. It was a mournful, crying sound. But for the first time since the ball hit her, Mr. Vance felt a tiny spark of relief. Help was coming. But he knew, deep down, that this wasn't something the paramedics could just fix and walk away from. The image of Chloe crumpling on the floor was burned into his mind forever. He had forced her to play, and now he would have to live with the consequences of those few terrible seconds. The sound of the sirens grew louder and louder until they seemed to be right inside the walls of the gym. Then, abruptly, the noise cut off. The silence that followed was even more frightening than the noise had been. The heavy metal doors at the far end of the gym swung open with a crash. 3 paramedics rushed in, 2 men and a woman, carrying bright orange bags and a folded stretcher. Their movements were fast and purposeful, full of a calm authority that made the teachers feel small and helpless. "Step back. Give us room," the female paramedic shouted as she knelt beside Chloe. Mr. Vance and Ms. Gable scrambled backward, almost tripping over their own feet to get out of the way. They stood shoulder to shoulder, watching with their hearts in their throats. The students pressed themselves back against the bleachers, forming a wide, fearful circle around the scene. The air in the gym felt charged with electricity, thick with anxiety. The paramedics worked quickly. One man shone a bright light into Chloe's unseeing eyes, checking her pupils. The woman felt for a pulse in her neck and checked her breathing. The third man was setting up the stretcher, locking the metal legs into place with loud clicks. "She's unresponsive but breathing," the woman said, her voice urgent but steady. "Weak pulse. We have a significant head injury here. We need to move her now. Prepare for transport." They gently slid a stiff plastic board under Chloe's back to keep her spine straight. They fastened a heavy strap across her chest and another across her legs. Seeing her strapped down like that, so small and lifeless, made Miss Gable gasp out loud. She brought a hand up to cover her mouth, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Gym class was supposed to be about running and jumping, not ambulances and stretchers. As the paramedics lifted the board, one of Chloe's arms, which had been lying loose at her side, swung down and hit the floor with a dull thud. Her backpack, which had been sitting on the floor near the wall, fell over with the movement. The zipper wasn't fully closed, and the contents spilled out across the polished wood. Mr. Vance stared at the mess. A battered math book fell out, along with a crumpled brown lunch bag. A pair of old, gray sneakers tumbled out, held together by strips of silver duct tape wrapped around the soles. And there, fluttering to ground like a fallen leaf, was a folded piece of paper with a hospital logo on the front. The paramedics were lifting Chloe onto the stretcher now. Mr. Vance stepped forward, not toward the girl, but toward the spilled bag. He didn't know why he was drawn to it, but he felt a strange pull. He knelt down and picked up the piece of paper. He unfolded it. It was a discharge summary from the hospital, dated just 2 days ago. At the top, it listed a patient name, Chloe's mother. The diagnosis was serious. Cancer, advanced. The words were like a punch to the gut, but it was a note scribbled on a yellow sticky note attached to the bottom of the page that made Mr. Vance's hands start to shake violently. The note was handwritten by a nurse. It read, *, Social Services notified. Mother currently unable to care for herself. Daughter, Chloe, is primary caregiver. Please note, Student is severely sleep-deprived and malnourished. Please allow rest and provide support. She is doing her best. Asterisk. Mr. Vance read the words 3 times. The letters blurred together through the sudden tears that filled his eyes. Primary caregiver. Severely sleep-deprived. Malnourished. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with brutal force. He realized why her clothes were too big. She was losing weight because she wasn't eating. He realized why she was so tired. She wasn't staying up late playing video games or looking at her phone. She was taking care of a dying mother. She was running a household by herself. She was a child carrying the weight of an adult on her shoulders. And what had he done? He had yelled at her. He had humiliated her. He had called her lazy. He had forced her to run when she could barely stand. He had thrown a ball at her head and ordered her to play. He looked up from the paper, his eyes finding Chloe's pale face as the paramedics wheeled her toward the doors. The guilt hit him so hard he felt like he might physically collapse under the weight of it. He saw Josh, the boy who had kicked the ball, standing frozen in the middle of the court. Josh looked like he was in a trance, staring at the red ball that was still sitting on the floor. "It's not your fault," a voice said softly. Mr. Vance turned. Ms. Gable was standing next to him. She had seen the note, too. She was pale, her face stripped of its usual sternness. "Yes, it is," Mr. Vance whispered, his voice cracking. "We're the adults here. We are supposed to protect these kids. We saw a kid who was tired, and we assumed the worst. We didn't ask. We didn't listen." "I told her to stop playing the victim," Ms. Gable said, her voice barely a whisper. She looked down at her hands. "I told her she was embarrassing herself. She was just trying to survive." The paramedics reached the double doors. They pushed through, the stretcher bumping over the threshold. The gym door swung shut behind them, leaving the students and teachers in the echoing silence of the room. No one spoke. The students stood still, looking at the empty doorway, then at their teachers. They sensed a shift in the room. They knew something had gone terribly wrong, but they didn't understand the depth of it yet. Mr. Vance took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He had to pull himself together. He had a class full of terrified kids. He stood up slowly, clutching the hospital note in his hand. "Class," he said, but his voice was weak. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Class is dismissed. Everyone go to the locker room quietly. Get your things and go home. There will be no more class today." The students didn't move at first. They looked at Josh, who was still staring at the floor. Then, slowly, they began to move. They didn't run or shout. They walked quietly, like they were in a library or a church. They grabbed their bags and slipped out the side doors, avoiding the spot on the floor where their classmate had fallen. Soon, the gym was empty. The only people left were Mr. Vance and Ms. Gable. The only sound was the low, constant hum of the fluorescent lights above. The room felt enormous, like a cavern. It felt cold. Mr. Vance walked over the spot where Chloe had fallen. There was a faint mark on the floor, a smudge where her face had been. He looked down at his shoes. He thought about his own children at home. He thought about how he would feel if someone treated them the way he had treated Chloe. The thought made his stomach churn. He looked across the court. The red rubber ball was still sitting there near the baseline, innocent and still. It was just a piece of rubber, but it looked like a weapon now. It was a symbol of his failure. Ms. Gable walked over and picked up the ball. She held it in her hands, turning it over and over. "What do we do?" she asked, looking at Mr. Vance with lost eyes. "We wait," Mr. Vance said softly, "and we pray, and then we go to the hospital, and we apologize for as long as it takes." He looked down at the note in his hand again. She is doing her best. The words echoed in his mind. She had been doing her best in the hardest fight a kid could face. And instead of helping her, he had made it harder. The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating. The gym, usually a place of noise and energy, felt like a tomb. The regret hung in the air, thicker than the heat, settling into the cracks of the floor and the walls. They knew that long after the lights were turned off and the doors were locked, they would still see her face. They would still hear the thud of the ball. They would remember the day they forced a child to play and learned too late what true strength really looked like.